All right. Let me take one quick puff here
Yeah, you
off
do.
this,
You do your thing. All
off
right.
this hippie blend. All right, there we go. All right. So I'm here today with Scott Seanan Zook, one of my oldest friends. We've known each other coming up on 20 years now, 20 some years, honestly.
Yeah.
And for the past, I would say a good decade, probably it started, I think, in earnest around 2017, 2018. You
Mm.
and I have discussed your studies. And so your study is being primarily in the Chinese cosmology. So what we in the
Mm.
West would understand is astrology.
Mm.
China has a counterpart, being the Ziwei Doushu, I believe,
Mm.
right? I've
Mm.
always
Mm.
called it the Tongshu, so I think there might be a couple different,
Yeah.
phrases, and they
Yeah.
mean different things, right?
Right.
We
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and I want you to address all of these things.
Mm.
But the reason why we're talking today is because I'm feeling it, you're feeling it, people around me are feeling it, people are talking about it. Something about this year feels special. Now, people might say that about every year, but I'm saying it about this one. So let's move. Um, as we were talking about this over the last few months, you mentioned this like a year ago. Last year was a water rabbit year. And you
Mm.
mentioned, you know, 18 months ago, you're like, Sash, the water rabbit year is going to be a liminal year and a drawing in, looking inward.
Mm.
And for me, it felt like being underwater beneath a big storm, like muffled, deep. Everywhere I looked was ocean. There was no land in sight necessarily. And that's a metaphor for just kind of floating through, as if floating through life and just trying to um, be aware of maybe my environment as much as possible. But it didn't feel like anything I tried last year. This is my personal experience, right? Seemed to go a little bit off. Relationships were a little bit, um, you know, they didn't really work. There was a lot of incompatibility. There was some miscommunication. Things didn't align well, but it wasn't
Mm.
in some ways. But at the same time, I felt really comfortable going in and
Mm.
just being me and being
Mm.
alone. So it was cool. I didn't mind it that much, and you prepared me for it. With some of the things we were discussing. Now, you have also mentioned multiple times that the year we're coming into now, we're currently just leaving the spring festival period. So the year is just starting. We're in the
Mm.
first month of the lunar calendar year, the spring, right? A
Mm-hmm.
fire
Mm-hmm.
tiger month. And
Mm-hmm.
you've said every time we talk, you're like, yo, the wood dragon year, which is the year we're entering right now, is going to be different. Inhibition falls away, manifestation comes to be. And so those are
Mm-hmm.
some of the things I want to talk about. Like when we say inhibition falls away, when we say, or when you say manifestation is now possible, it's going to be action packed. When you say things like a fire tiger month and a fire rabbit month are going to be, explosive and active, I would like, for me, things that we've discussed, this cosmology that you work with considers time to be a flow, like a river, very Taoist in that sense that there is no static points.
Yeah.
So I think one way we could start this discussion is to talk about the flow of qi, which is what we're kind of discussing here, energy,
Mm-hmm.
from the year we just left, the water rabbit
Mm-hmm.
year,
Mm-hmm.
into this year.
Mm-hmm.
And what are you seeing? What are the big differences? And let's start there. I think
Yeah.
with the ideas of inhibition and a manifestation.
So one of the things I found really interesting when I did the talk over at Wudong West with David Wei, and in the beginning I tried to be like encouraging, like give people a pep talk because I figured part of the thing that I wanted to talk about was this sense of the word always escapes me. I don't know why. This kind of morbidity that we've been embodying, which is in part, I think one of the things that the water rabbit invites, in terms of how we going inward is not necessarily a comfortable process. Okay, so right, so like the reason why we have these kinds of, why you might feel this, you know, the hexagram would be, I think 39, opposition. Oh no, I think that's stumbling anyway. There's a hexagram that's like basically the things kind of try to converge, but you know, don't really meet. And I think that's available, especially in a water rabbit year, because everybody's trying to deal with like a big bundle of feelings that they don't know how to engage, right? So like all those things are just like there, you know, as a heavy weight that, you know, nobody can really avoid. Um, so, you know, if you have a great emotional intelligence, you developed a certain level of skill set as an individual, but then you also have to think collectively as a society. One of the things, or a neighborhood or an area, like that's why feng shui was so important, you know, in any rabbit year, because you are deeply
Mm.
affected by your environment at all times, you know, so especially in a water rabbit year. So to, even if you're well adjusted, if you're living in a neighborhood of like, where there's, you know, drive-bys every week, you're undermining your capacity just by being in that environment. So that's,
Real quick, I think what comes to mind for me, so specifically for my experience, which
uh-huh,
might be an example.
uh-huh,
So I found myself really going in, starting
uh-huh,
almost immediately last year. There were a lot of
uh-huh,
things that
yeah.
happened. You know what I'm saying? I was kind
Hmm.
of really sitting with myself. And,
And that was the empowerment that was available in a water rabbit year. It said that at the beginning of the year, which is to say the water rabbit finds its empowerment by retreat.
the cool thing that, because when you just mentioned that also, like, nothing is uh, unconnected. Nothing is unconnected, especially not
No,
in
yeah,
this
not
system,
possible.
but
Yeah.
in general. That's impossible. So I found myself going in while at the same time I was more involved in my community, my local, like South Side Powderhorn community than ever. I started playing kickball last
Yeah.
spring. And what
Right.
I noticed was that everyone needed
Mm-hmm.
Monday evening kickball.
Mm-hmm.
Not just
Mm-hmm.
because it was fun, but
Yeah.
because people would show up with like a little bit wide-eyed.
Yeah.
Everyone
Yeah.
was going through some stuff. There were multiple people there who you couldn't tell unless you actually had a conversation with them, but everyone was going through something. And that
Mm-hmm.
communal, that like, oh my God, it's in my community. I walk to this kickball
Mm-hmm.
field. I know everybody. We meet on a regular basis. That was incredibly helpful. And it's
Yeah.
cool that
Super
you
nourishing.
mentioned it's not just
Yeah.
going in, but also being in community with around you. And that's, I think, very, very fascinating because um it's not that simple. It's not like one thing. It's not, we go in the water rabbit year. Yes, and you know.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So you were talking about that just now. I don't want to cut you off because you had a flow going on. So
Yeah, no, it's all good. I mean, it's those environmental concerns as human beings are deeply effective, right? So the question really then is like, um, um, in talking about any year, we have to talk about our capacities to rise to meet the opportunities. The opportunities that happen in any given year or any given day or any month, etc., are not like, this is not an objective word of God. This is what's going to happen, because the Chinese cosmology at its root is not a theistic cosmology. It's an observable relational science. That's it, right?
mm,
So
that's
it
a
has
beautiful
a
statement. An
it has a level of
observable relational
relational
science.
science, yeah.
Mm,
And it has like, and the reason why it's effective, even though it's open for interpretation, it's assuming your involvement actually creates a different set of conditions, than what's just written on the paper, because you're supposed to be in a place of contribution to what's available, to the opportunities that are available. So,
it's not
um,
happening to me. It's describing a set of relationships that currently exist in this moment, and I am I am absolutely connected. So as soon as I touch it, it changes. You
Yeah,
know, it
your appearance in the flow of time is part of the auspice, any given set of auspices. That's why I've said to David Way and elsewhere, like we have to, if we're actually one of the ways to really digest this material, this cosmology, one of the implications of digesting it, and one of the ways we can digest it, is to think both of our appearance in time and our appetites in time as omens, signifiers of experience, right? So we're not just meat bags, full of chemicals that are isolated from the rest of the world. We're actually constantly in this place of communication. And what arises for us has some sort of origin source point that we should pay attention to, because they should be considered as kind of guide points, for pursuit. Now, some years and sometimes there's less, maybe not such a good idea, and a good idea, that's kind of available in that sort of exploration of appetite, which is what is available when we're talking about the wood dragon year, is this notion of appetite, this available appetite, and finding its source point of that appetite in the water rabbit year, because as I've said elsewhere, like we're not escaping the ocean, we're manifesting it. We're
that's
taking
I
it
think
into
really
manifestation.
that's really I think an important point to understand, because people, myself included, want
Sure.
some sort of lodestar, some sort of idea. Okay, what does this mean? How does it apply to me? If we have esoteric conversations, which I love, I'll get lost in them every day. But the idea that, okay, last year, was a year of drawing inward, um, being in
Hmm.
communication with your environment,
Hmm.
and I think you mentioned inhibition, which is something that I've struggled to understand completely the way you're describing it. And so all of the things that we maybe experienced, thought about, struggled with, found ourselves misaligned with, or in depth with in the water rabbit year,
Okay. Yeah.
those appetites that maybe didn't come to fruition at that point in time last year, in this year, the wood dragon year, there's a possibility. There's
There's a
more. There's
blooming.
that. What's up?
There's
There's
a
a
blo-
blooming. Ooh, I
there's a
like it.
blooming. Now, I think that if we're just to make it very simple in terms of uh, inhibition, understanding inhibition, think of inhibition as just like a
Mm.
heavy blanket. Like, so I don't know, I don't feel like talking to anybody. Like this kind of um you don't this you can say restriction. I use inhibition just because it's a chi condition. So it's not anything to take personally. It's just like I don't feel like going out, like that's very it's inhibited from one standpoint, empowering from the water rabbit standpoint, which is to say, I'm good, it's 8:30, I'm not going out or talking to anybody. Like I'm ready to hunker down, pretty much all day. I haven't left the house, I feel great. Like these are considered like what's wrong with me, from
Yeah,
from the Western standpoint of constant productivity, and we should always be increasing ourselves and improving and evolving. The water rabbit year might
going
have
out,
felt
seeing people, being active,
water
like
year
to have a
felt like
blanket
an
over you is like the,
yeah,
they're like, I've been home all day, and some people would be like, I feel great. Most people would be like,
I'm
uh,
worthless. Yeah, I
yeah,
feel
something's
worthless. Yeah.
wrong. Something's wrong.
Yeah, that's a conditioning, like that's a relative state. It's a relative state of mind, like any other relative state of mind. One of the most important things for me in approaching this particular cosmology and trying to embody it, um, is to recognize that, and this is I've been working directly with this for a while, is to think about like every culture makes assumptions about what it means to be a human being. Every single one, like they have some assumption about like what's important, what the values are. Right? In the most dangerous cultures are the ones that whose central assumption is that they don't make any. So that's the biggest obstacle for all of our audience, for myself, for anyone, in the Western culture, to really grasp, what is available as a view, as a cosmological teaching in the Chinese tradition, is the assumptions that we carry and that we have them, because like most people are like, I don't have any, and then they'll immediately interpret, Chinese cosmological wisdom from a psychological standpoint. Okay, that
Yeah,
assumption
it's
that you were just doing, like that is the assumption that you're wielding. And it's not to say that your assumption is wrong and you should drop it, but at the very least, you should understand that you have one. Like
yeah,
if
I
you
mean
can't go there, you won't understand this material.
and
You'll
you
constantly appropriate it.
it's very at the moment in this point in time it's very Western because the reason why I think uh Western civilization could be accused of forgetting that it holds assumptions is because we have in the last 500 years since the Enlightenment convinced ourselves that we have an objective tool, that
Right.
science,
That
democracy,
is the
capitalism,
central assumption. Yes.
right? Is that
Or
we
is
are
one.
our things are universal. Y'all just ain't
Yeah.
figured it out yet. There's
Right.
this
Yeah.
phrase from uh Good Morning Vietnam. So it's a quote, so excuse me, but he says that one of these army figures tells another soldier, he's like, inside every gook is an American trying to get out. And this right there is
Right.
beautiful
Right.
writing
Right.
because it really expresses what's up.
Right.
And
Right.
so when you have this idea that I'm not making an assumption, I'm just
Right.
clearly viewing
I'm
your
just,
lens
yeah.
through my
Yeah.
universalist wisdom, right?
Yeah. 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 You just don't make any sense.
Yeah, you just don't know science or whatever.
Yeah. 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 And that's the and we could spend a lot. I mean, I'm not smart enough to completely deconstruct the scientific the scientific assumptions of the West, other than to say, like thinking about Stephen Kuhn and talking about his groundbreaking work on like studying scientific revolutions, is to simply say that there is what's called a verificationist theory of truth, meaning that the only thing that is true is something that can be repeated over and over and over and over in somehow neutral, objective, sterile conditions. And that informs our calendar, it informs our medicine, it informs how we talk to each other, that we have these, that this is the central assumption. The kind of science, because Ming would say over and over again, this is science. This is science. What the Chinese were doing is science. This is science, not just a proto science. It's a science, but it's the core of its science is associative, is to be able to associate experiences and to make, extrapolations and conclusions from it. They're actually really
Which
quite effective.
Yeah, exactly. And the reason why it's effective is because I think it is, although and you have been taught all of our entire lives that linear relationships and
Yeah,
linear movement, right? That we are disassociated. Me and the tree are completely separate from each
right.
other. We've been taught that. So, and that is false. Like, I think it's demonstrably false. You and I can sit here and talk about that all day, but I think it's false. Whereas the Chinese tradition, it takes that as that is their assumption that indeed we are not disconnected, and so
Yeah,
it seems a little bit more true to life. Before we get off on some esoteric shit,
sure.
um,
Yeah,
right? Let's get back to the inhibition to manifestation kind of
right.
bridge that we're working with now.
So
So
when you're
water
talking
rabbit
about
year,
yeah,
right? We got
inhibition,
the
heavy
blanket.
blanket, right? So it's a transition from the heavy blanket to something lighter. That's it. And like and the capacity to recover optimism. Like remember optimism? So
No,
it's this yeah, exactly. So that's what's meant by inhibition is over. Does that mean we immediately write out to meet it? Some do, but not many. Like going back to how I started, was to say that in this the Wudang West presentation, I gave this like throw off inhibition. Like it's done. It's been This morbidity has been used to control you. Come on, like let's get rid of it. And it was a very great teaching moment for me, to feel everybody in the audience go, really?
We can, what is that? Like, what do you mean? Like, I can do stuff? Like, I can have hope?
Sure.
Because especially, and you and I have spoken about this in length, given what's going on in Gaza, in the
Yeah,
navel of
sure.
I mean, it could be argued human civilization, but definitely Western civilization. There is ruthless, senseless, um,
That,
and unstoppable genocide,
yeah.
completely unreasoned and held up by a tiny minority, the meathead US, and this tiny little country that we're propping up.
Yeah.
So given, like, let's fuck with that as like as an example to lead
As an
from maybe the
example.
water
Yeah.
rabbit to the wood dragon. So we have
Well,
at the tail end of the water rabbit, we have October 7th, and then the response, and all the history. We don't need to talk about all that right here, right now.
right.
Going into like a year where the blanket is thrown off and there can be optimism or lightness or manifestation or some sort of action in a dragon year,
Mhm.
like using that fucking genocide as a sorry, I mean
As
that's
an
just what it is,
example.
bro. You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
As an
Um,
example, what's up?
well, it's a very, very simple answer, which is there's nothing stops us from misusing the chi. There's nothing, like, sorry, like, again, this is not the word of God. There's nothing that stops us from misusing the opportunity, which you could easily say is a misuse of the opportunity in one sense. In another sense, as we mentioned with the Wood Dragon Year, it is a unstoppable sea change that is available. That is what's available with any Dragon Year is very forward going. It's not looking back. It's actually what's the transformation that needs to take place. And it's particularly, excuse me, with Wood Dragon Year, it is this kind of, freshness of a sea change, made the water from the last 2 years moving up into this place of manifestation to radically reshape the environment. I call it's a terraforming kind of chi. And in the case of the first moon, the fire or tiger moon, which is absolutely ruthless, potentially strongly available to misconducting ourselves, then it is burning the forest. It is this ruthless energy of burning the forest, combined with a wood dragon. That's why, when this whole crisis started, and I will call it a crisis, when it happened in October, just I remember exactly when and where, I was, because I was like, this is the worst possible thing that could happen, like in terms of the time that it was happening. Terrible miscalculation,
Why?
really.
Why?
Because it was happening in a water rabbit year. First off, rabbit chi is absolutely prefers peace and inaction, right? It absolutely prefers making of alliances and deliberation, unless it's put into a place of vengeance. And like that is what water rabbit, being the deepest, most emotionally available kind of rabbit, could easily go into, is this place of like extreme vengeance. And then it happened in the autumn, which is, like in a rabbit, rooster rabbit, no chance of miscommunication, great chance of reactivity. And then even on the specific weekend that it happened, I was like, oh, this is terrible. This is a haunting of the highest order, from a Tang Dynasty perspective. Like, it's just ghosts and gods fighting, like it's no humans there anymore, like it's just, and there are humans caught in the middle of this like ancient. That's why we ended up getting in these conversations about like, people are like, what's wrong with out there? And it's like, it's the mountain, it's the feng shui of that region, it's the history. That from a cosmological Chinese perspective, of course, death and destruction, all bad, but like the cosmological Chinese perspective wants to enlarge in the dialogue and perspective. It always does that. I mean, in medieval China, they would, if a bridge fell, they would collect all of the data about that bridge for the last 500 years before they decided to rebuild it or to wait maybe till a better time to build it. So cosmologically speaking, from this tradition, any event that happens, especially on that larger scale, has to be taken in this larger cosmological context. And it's not just the history of who wronged who. It's the feng shui of the territory. It's the other beings and other realms that exist in that area that are known to have influence. And the god of the Sinai is, if nobody's talking, if you're not talking about that, then you're not getting the whole story, of like why humans are sacrificing other humans to that god, which is
So
exactly
what?
what's happening.
So I remember when we spoke about this, when that happened, and you said this is the worst possible
The
thing.
worst possible thing
Yeah.
that could happen. And
You
like
know what I'm
even
saying?
even worse than that is that and I've talked about this with other people, is like no one will forget in their entire lifetime. No one will forget. And like because of the timing in which it happened. So, if the Israeli government was trying to get over and like do their 9/11, right? Like and use the pretext of a tragedy to reshape the environment. I would say, as a Chinese astrologer, they vastly miscalculated. And in that miscalculation, it just means it's going to be 10 times more exhausting, to actually whatever goal that they have. And I'm not agreeing or disagreeing. I can't agree, but like it would be 10 times more exhausting to accomplish that goal. But that's what happens when you have zealots in power. They
Quick
don't care
question.
about.
So let's bring this chi into now. Let's bring this example into now. So the
Yeah,
beginning was one of the worst possible beginnings. You're like, oh
terrible.
shit, this is going to be bad. And it has been, and it still is really bad.
Mhm,
What
mhm.
does the chi of the next few moons of this next year, what would you see? How would you then, how would you interpret or how would you look at this
What the
crisis
possibilities
given
are?
given
Yeah.
given that inhibition is gone, manifestation is around, we have fire tigers and fire
And
rabbits,
this
wood
is the
dragons,
momentum
what do
coming
you
from the
what
last year. Yeah, yeah,
you feel me? Yeah. So what would
yeah.
an astrologer then? Let's say this. I am a governor of a state
Hmm.
that is neighboring Gaza.
Hmm.
And I
Hmm.
go to my Chinese astrologer and I say, bro, what the fuck? What should I be doing right now? And you're all like, what can we see looking forward? What would you say?
Yeah, I mean, in answering that question, obviously there's a lot more cofactors to take into account, right? And nobody is participating in this cosmology. So that's the one thing. It's all completely theistic, like approach
There.
in
But
that area.
yeah.
So there's no, a neighbor that would operate with this cosmology would most likely lay low, protect yourself, because there's nothing you cannot, that you
Why?
can't
Why would
change.
I? Yeah, yeah.
Changing the
So
mind of theists, like they don't listen to time.
does the
Like
wood dragon does the wood dragon year influence theists? Like how would the chi of this year influence what is happening in the crisis?
they would need to see a miracle. That's what influences theists. They need to see a miracle.
And
They
is
would need to
that
see a
is
miracle.
is does the wood dragon chi give us the
Third
possibility
moon,
of miracles?
third moon, maybe. Yeah, third moon. Maybe even somewhere in the second moon, there might be some sort of, some kind of sign, some sort of divine intervention, moment of divine intervention. Yeah, I think that's possible. And
Why?
either
What is happening in the second and third moon that would make you think that?
uh the second moon being a rabbit moon, and much more attuned to environment. Like first moon, tiger moon, it's just like I want what I want, get out of my way, right? And in the even though it's a fire rabbit, there is a little bit more gentleness available, a little bit more of an appetite to actually perceive what the environment's giving back.
Hmm.
In fact, that's even like accentuated, like amplified, our perceptive abilities in a in a wood dragon year, anything's possible. This is a great question. Yeah, like, so the second moon could actually facilitate a level of receptivity, and also people could double down. So I mean, it's 50-50. It's either way. And then the third moon, which means you'll be in double dragon, that's when we're really going to know we're going to see like we're going to really feel like the results of this conflict. Like this is when we're going to cross a threshold in terms of like consequence of what's happened. I mean, it could be, meaning that by the third moon, as it looks right now, over 1 million people will be occupying the Sinai Desert, right? And that whole area will be flattened, because that is the stated explicit goal. So unless there is this kind of intervention, miraculous at this point, because where the power is not interested in this dialogue. And one of the attributes of the wood dragon is that small undermines big. In this case, the small of the people who hold power aren't listening to the big, the world population, for instance, that's actually much more interested in like, whoa, 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 like slow down. Like at the very least, like just saying, can we just take a break here? Like, and stop. So if people are dying, can we get them some water? Like basic human reaction, even not knowing anything about the conflict or the history, just to see someone starving, children starving, dying, needing water and food, let's just stop so we can give this guy a sandwich or whatever. That's a basic human reaction. This is a Confucian teaching that is, spread throughout this cosmology, is that this is primary, that these are the things we should be listening to as practitioners of time, as practitioners of the Chinese tradition, is if we
But that's
can't,
not happening.
that's not happening. Why isn't that happening? Is because we're dominated by and large by a theistic outlook. And some may argue that their theism actually mandates a humanitarian response. It's totally, yes, of course, appropriate. But that is not the God of the Sinai that's currently speaking. That's somebody else's God over here or over there. There are plenty of them, that have different, visions of the world. So when it comes to restoring optimism, I think,
Yeah, that's
I'm
because
talking on a general, I am talking on a general level. If if we're consumed by this single story, which is quite natural to have happen, and then we're also, talking about the momentum of the water rabbit as it's informing the wood dragon year. But that's not the only thing that's going on. So that's why I bring forward this notion of optimism. And to be honest, like, there's a lot of people, even if we're continuing to talk about this conflict and how people are responding to it, there's constantly mention, all social media and news being like, the veil has lifted. We see very clearly that our leadership has failed us. Very clearly that our leadership has failed us, that the small oligarchy is only undermining this popular swell of humanity that's attempting to speak and influence, events in the world. Well, this is very positive, even though people are being sacrificed for it. Like, and this is this continuation of like Ming's teaching in 2012 at the last Dragon Year, is to recognize that the roles of leadership throughout the world are corrupt. There's no leadership that's actually representing its people. None. Like very few. Like maybe on one hand you can count the leadership that's actually responding and reflecting to the needs of the people themselves. So the suggestion in that year was to consider just the roles, not the people who occupy them, but the roles themselves as corrupt. So let's circumnavigate it. Let's do the things that we need to do to bring ourselves together. And it's just what you do normally do. So make different choices in who you want to support, who you want to collaborate with, who you want to extend your energy, money, time, chi, attention to. Like, be in tune with that and occupy this body. And he would cite like the Dalai Lama, or other people who are leaders but have no country as like the kinds of, things that we can emulate. But I would say in this particular year, it's decentralization that needs to happen. We need to decentralize. We need to be more in these kind of community bodies. We need to be more in, and that's what's happening. And it's this tragedy that's going on that's actually facilitating that. And a lot of people are worried, as they should be, because this is only a beginning. When we talk about manifestation in the Wood Dragon year, there's short and long term manifestations that are happening and that are being initiated, right? So maybe we get some kind of fulfillment this year of some kind, but we're actually, when we're talking sea change, we're talking also years down the road. And any dragon year is going to have an impact and an effect much longer than its specific year. Right?
Let's shift gears. Let's shift gears a little bit, because I think that gives us an opportunity to kind of get back to the actual cosmology. And let me know how you're on time, okay? So when, you know what I'm saying? So let's talk a little bit, I guess, generally about Wood Dragon Chi versus some of these other Chis. Maybe we could even go 2 years in either direction. We had Water Tiger, Water Rabbit, then it's Wood Dragon, Wood Snake.
Wood Snake, right? Yeah.
So let's discuss some of the elements and the animals so that people can get an idea of, okay, what the fuck is the difference between a dragon and a tiger,
Perspective.
Let's hear it. Yeah, let's start. Let's start generally with kind of tiger, rabbit, dragon, snake. What comes after snake? Horse.
Sure, horse. Yeah,
let's just talk about that and see what happens.
So the best way to think about the 12 earthly branches, and that's what we're talking about, the 12 earthly branches, right, is a correspondence to cycle of 12 that have 5 iterations each, which then create a cycle of 60. And astrologically, this corresponds to the Jupiter cycle. The Jupiter cycle is a cycle of 60. So that's kind of the base, if we're talking about early observations of humanity in China, this cycle of 60 is throughout every astrological system of humanity, because the Jupiter cycle was actually really important for astrological thought as it was developing and has been expressed in human history. So this is what the cycle of 12 and the cycle of 60 is rooted in, is this relationship to Jupiter. Right? So
that's fascinating. I know nothing about that. Do we
cool,
want to go into that, or is that
no? I mean, there's nothing more to say. That's just that's
there
what it is.
A lot more to say, but not right now. Keep going.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting the reason why not is because basically cosmological bodies, like heavenly bodies, in the East and West are treated differently. In the West, they're treated as gods that are constantly monitoring us and influencing our behavior. They're anthropomorphized. Yeah, and that's how we still think of it. Oh, Jupiter's over there, I better hold off. You have this kind of response to where Jupiter's at, and everybody's tracking it and disagreeing about degrees and directions. It gets very heady and kind of a little too specific for the Chinese mentality of the East. They're like, what is this trying to say? Okay, figure out what it's trying to say, all the different versions of what it might say, and then mathematize its movement because it's very regular. So we make it more of an abstract relationship rather than of a message of relatedness that exists in the environment. It's just where, this is our relatedness formula, right? And this particular astronomical body then brings that relatedness into the scene. We don't need to track it. We just need to understand what its message is and then mathematize its movements, and then it becomes a number, 60, rather than the body that we're kind of nervously watching, right? So it's much more enabling in some ways, I feel, just it's like talking about physics, that's what Ming would always say. It's more of a physics approach in turning physics into math in terms of understanding the movements of the heavens rather than, tracking what Mercury is doing.
Yeah, see, I shouldn't have even said there's more to say, because there is a lot more to say. Let's get back to the 12 earthly branches, but there's so much I want to say about that. But anyway, keep going. about
So
all that
it's just
cool
the approach that
facts.
the Chinese took. And
Got it. So
so
we've got 12 animals. Each animal has 5 elements. Um,
5M.
fire, water, earth, wood, metal.
I mean, I talk about them generatively. So water, wood, fire, earth, metal, right? So they each one informs the next and then has a corresponding all kinds of different relationships.
Say them again in
So
their generative
water,
order.
wood, fire, earth, and metal.
Beautiful.
Water, wood,
Okay.
fire, earth, and metal.
All right.
So, and we'll come back to that just to say that the relationship between the 12 earthly branches, one of the easiest ways to discuss and understand them is their relationship on a seasonal level. Okay, so tiger and rabbit occupy the urges of spring that are escaping winter, right? So in answering the question between difference between a tiger and a dragon, I say perspective because a tiger is pretty is pretty focused, and it's not double checking. It's just its tendency is to go forward with everything that it has because there is a kind of desperation to spring because it's attempting to escape and reassert itself, from this undifferentiated quality of winter, where you're like, don't know what direction to go because every direction looks the same, right? And when wood comes around and yang wood, because each of the 12 animals is reflective of an element natally, right? So tiger is a yang wood element, right? So it is forward going, impulsive, also hungry, assertive, is very interested in information as a consumptive act, right? And then you have this backup quality, which is to retreat into this freshness and be in that liminal space, which is the rabbit. And the rabbit is like, okay, I've just made a mess. Let me kind of figure out what do I do with this, and what are my actual opportunities? So it's a growth process. It's representative of a certain kind of growth process that is seeing the mirroring aspect between my internal state and the external condition, right? I get a chance to kind of step back and see what it is that's happening and how I can kind of apply myself to it. So it's still progressive, yeah, even though it's a step back to examine, yeah. Um, and then with dragon, which is natively an earth element, it is assumed that no matter what happens, no matter what we do, things are coming into form. And it is the earth is one of the, as an earth element and an earth moon, it is one of the transitional places between seasons. So we're moving away from the experimentations of spring. I'll try this out. I tried, oh, that didn't work, and like this kind of back and forth quality into, okay, now I'm going forward, and I'm removing all doubt. I've got what I've got. I'm making it happen, like whatever it is that's here is what I'm supposed to be doing, so it has this kind of wide open quality. And one of the reasons why they're different, tigers and dragons, is because a tiger is pretty straightforward, whereas a dragon, who's seen one, like it's kind of mythical, made of many parts, and who knows what it's doing, and that's representative of three things. First is it's a synthesis, meaning that there's so much more in play than we realize. Like, right? So I have what I want. I push into the environment. I get feedback. Okay, I feel like I can go forward. But as it turns out, there's a million different things at play. Right. So this is the awareness of the dragon is to bring this in home. Right. And then, and that plays into the second point, which is to say that dragons are a reminder that we are in partnership with heaven. As Hexagram 1 of the Joey says, which is a divination book related to this tradition, is that Hexagram 1 says is to remind us of the somewhat unpredictable partnerships we have with heaven. We can't know everything that's possible. We can't control everything that's possibly going to happen. And dragon is this kind of representation of that fact. And that points to a difference in the cosmology between East and West. And the East is this kind of trifecta relationship where humanity, to be a human, stand between heaven and earth, promoting harmony, yeah, in all three of these relationships. That's the whole goal, as it were, to any kind of cosmological study and ritual and astrology, is to find the harmony of how these three things work together. Because their influence, Chinese tradition is informed by flood. You know, the floods that come down and like wipe out like whole villages. They bring fertility, but they take away half your population. So this is deeply informed in the Chinese tradition. Is like, how do we make this work, and how do we predict, you know, how to navigate something that's inherently uncontrollable, no chance of controlling it. In the West, we are we are obliged by our relationship to a theistic entity to control and dominate and command nature, not be in partnership, but to make it do what we want. So I think that's a fundamental misunderstanding of the dragon.
I'm going to use personal experience, you know, what I can remember and what is, you know, within my mind, twisted and perceived as memory, to try and make sense of tiger, rabbit, dragon progression.
Okay. Yeah, please.
So tiger was 22, rabbit was 23. Here we are in 24. In 2022, I tried a bunch of shit. Okay. I went to Spain, I went to Paris, I went to Germany. For that, I had gone to Turkey, and I was strongly considering moving to Europe. I was like, I remember talking to you about this. I'm like, I want to move to Europe within 6 months. Some shit like that.
I'm ready to get out of here. Yeah.
I'm ready to get.
That's very tigery. That's very tigery.
Yeah, I'm like, I need to get the fuck out. Right.
Right.
Didn't happen. And I also tried multiple different collaborations, work-wise, and they all kind of faltered in some form. Some of them, there were fruits, you know, but they were all just like I dove into work-related collaborations that you know,
hit or miss, yeah,
hit or miss, right? And then I also reconnected with a girl who I'd had, you know, multiple years of bullshit with, right? And I was like, yeah.
Now it'll be different.
I'm like, this time it's gonna be different, right? I'm like, this time you know. So, and then in the water rabbit year, I spent time figuring out what the fuck just happened, basically. You know? And kind of taking stock of what really was, what really is, not only within me, but around me. And I realized where my community currently is, who I want to be with, what kind of work I want to do, these types of things. I don't know if I realized them, but I sat with those ideas. And now I can't say I've come to any clear conclusions necessarily.
Not necessary. Yeah, not necessary.
But interesting point. But now coming into the dragon year, right? So tiger tried a bunch of shit. Some of it worked, most of it didn't. Rabbit year, kind of sitting, looking around, judging my environment, looking within, being like, okay, taking stock in a way. And then now in the dragon year, I feel in my bones, and this is also through conversations that you and I have had, but also just based upon my own life, that this is going to be a year, an eventful year, that certain things that I dreamt about in 22, sat with in 23, are in one form or another are going to be resolved in some form or another in this year. That's how I feel. How does that sound to you, as like within kind of the ideas of what you were just talking about?
So one of the things to bring attention to is obviously the movement of fate, right? And it's an important qualifier, that there are the general opportunities of the Tongshu, and then there are the capacities of the fate, right? And this is where, at the beginning of the conversation, we mentioned the Tongshu and Ziweidoshu. The Tongshu are like is the calendar, the almanac, the year that we're talking about. It's actually it's not just the year There's all these other rotating cyclical indicators that are constantly, expressing. And those represent the kind of general capacities we have to express and resolve our fate. Right? So we can have
The
very
environment.
strong. Yes, it's the image that Ming always used, and I think it's so appropriate, is the buffet. Like this is the buffet for the year. It looks like this, and so you need to eat. So there's only mac
I'm
and
going for the
cheese this
fried
year.
chicken.
Right. But there's no fried chicken. There's only, yeah, right. Exactly. So there's some years where you're like, there's no fried chicken. And
Like a
that's
buffet with
the
no fried chicken.
and
Put this buffet together.
that's the expression of your year is like, where's the fried chicken? Like that's and that may be like what's available for you as generally as a character. But then you might have a fate within that year that knows somebody who in the back alley hands you some fried chicken. Like
Fried
but
chicken.
that might be also part of the story of the year. So, which is, it adds the texture when we're talking about desires and fulfillment and things coming to fruition. That is something that we expect out of life. That life is actually a little bit more complicated than just like whether or not it's a thumbs up or a thumbs down kind of year, because there's so many other things going on. So
Of
that's
course.
so the capacity is also part of our experience, which is reflected by Zuidoshu or pole star astrology. So there's a natal chart fate in fate itself and its relationship to freedom,
Of course. I understand the
right?
difference
So
between the two.
there's always freedom, some degree of freedom that's involved, regardless of how strong your fate is. So it's a much more textured conversation. So you can think of Tongshu as opportunity and Zuidoshu and those kinds of calculations as part of our capacity, and whether or not those two
Mm.
things match. So, but generally speaking, in answer to your question, talking about the Wood Dragon year and the opportunities of the Wood Dragon year, I encourage everybody to think of what you're bringing to manifestation, right? As an initiation process rather than like everything's going to be fulfilled this year. Think of it more of as an initiation process because Dragon moves beyond the year that it's in. So in some sense, I think of it as in relationship to 2028, to be frank, because the reach of the Wood Dragon year is going to be until 2028 and 2029,
Jesus.
where manifestation is actually much more available. Like in another set of calculations in 2028 and 2029, there's an availability to manifestation more broadly, generally, because those are both Earth element years, while we're in a Wood element year, which is much more interested in initiation and imagination and those kinds of creative expressions, but it may just be temporary. That's very Wood, is to disappear. That's why Wood Dragon is considered, of the five dragons, kind of lightweight, because it has a tendency to disappear pretty quickly, but inspired, deeply inspired, like greatly inspired. So it's important, I think, and as I talk about this and practice this, to think of things in terms of a light touch. Yeah. Like how light can our touch be? Because that actually be the most productive thing, is to have a light touch. But we have in the West, like I need to command, and that's our relationship to Dragon Chi, is to be commanding power. But the notion of power in the East is related to the dragon is very different than we understand dragons in the West. West is like the dragons are fearful, and not to say that that's absent from Asian cosmology, but it's to say
They're
more
very
magical.
playful.
Yes, very enlivening, and hopeful, just because this is this kind of the time where we should be open to what life has to bring us, even if it's to take everything away. Like, oh, my slate is clear. I can now be like available to what I really want. Again, it depends on if we have a lot of things we're carrying into the year, you might need to get rid of a lot of things to feel that light, to feel that open. You might need to feel like to really let go. So it just depends on if we've got a lot of baggage, that we're bringing into the wood dragon year. Yeah, you might miss the opportunity of the wood dragon because you're just so committed to carrying these heavy bags. So there could be the terraforming is what makes you available, but dragons don't care if you get what you want. They don't care at all. It's a cosmological movement. And so if you have, also things available in, for instance, if you have Chisha or whatever in your first house in a dragon year, then you may lose more than you gain, but it actually is a transformation process, regardless, an
I
important
have greedy
transformation
wolf in
process.
my Ming house this year, bro.
I mean, you're in America, so you're in the right place. If you were in, in another country that had more like stricter societal standards, it might be tough going. But like in America, like greedy wolf isn't as a big a problem.
Hasn't been a
Is
problem. Is that what you said?
It's not as big a problem you know in the
What do
States.
you,
Like
so like, I mean, obviously, it sounds like I'm being, pretty selfish and using myself and trying to and ask you questions regarding myself, but I'm taking the audience into consideration because you and I have talked about this for shit going on 10 years almost. And so I have an idea of what a greedy wolf can bring to the table because it's also in my Ming palace in in my natal chart. So I'm like, oh, that's just, oh, I believe it is, but it's also I spent 10 years in China with greedy wolf in my, you know what I'm saying?
sure,
I'm
sure,
like familiar with it.
right.
But you know, we're not gonna be able to cover everything. So fuck it. Like let's say what would a greedy wolf, what does that mean? Like, let's just follow that thread for a little bit. Like a greedy wolf in the Chinese cosmology in your Ming palace. Like, what does that mean in a wood dragon year coming out of a water rabbit year? Now, so I know not everybody has that,
For
but I
Yeah,
think it
that's
would
very
be interesting.
specific for a
It's
fire
very
snake.
specific, but the reason why I want to do that, the reason why I think
Oh,
it might be helpful is because
mhm.
it gives kind of like an example of like, okay, this is how this cosmology looks at certain things. I don't know if
Okay,
that's
so
helpful or not.
yeah, no,
We
I
might
mean,
we might delete all this shit, but
I can make a very simple statement, actually, just based on the fact of the general auspices for the snake in a wood dragon year are to default to personal expression. Um, Actually, it's like one of the because wood dragon year is very creative. It's the artist year, it's the artist year.
word.
For sure. Yeah, it's a good year for artists to express themselves. So for a snake, if you don't have an art, you should get one, because from this cosmology standpoint, art for a snake is a great place to hide and also like retreat into it and develop it and express it and put it out there could actually be a good look, very mesmerizing, which snakes love to mesmerize, right? So they can, entice others around them with these sort of gems that they recovered from the deep, in the water year, and then they express it artistically in a wood dragon year. And then so if you have greedy wolf in the first house, then you're sort of already predisposed to do that because especially 20th century art in America is very let's talk about me, like this is my feeling about what's happening in the world and blah,
Mm,
and just kind of
mm.
puts it out there. So it can be very in the right context, that particular configuration can be would it be long lasting? Would it be like a major pivot, in your considered to be the most important pivotal expression of your life? Probably not. Wood dragon is, or sorry, greedy wolf is not long lasting. It's not a strong configuration, but it can be a very important one in the cultivation of what we call in the West our personal voice, our voice, right? So in a wood dragon year, that would probably be my recommendation. Like, what's your voice? And figure it out, share it, and just put it out there without, don't double check, you just follow the kind of inspirational cue you know, that the wood dragon is providing, because inspiration is the dominant theme of the year. You know, the cosmological entity that rules the year is a dakini. You know, a dakini or a daka, like is dakas and dakinis. Yeah, they are the cosmological entity that rules the entire year. So there's
Why?
no shortage. Just because of the configuration of the year, you know, like inspiration, the wood element being related to inspiration, and it being a dragon year, those are the kind of cosmological figures that represent, you know, inspiration. Um,
Bikinis, huh? I don't know anything about them, unfortunately.
yeah, they're like the jade ladies in the Chinese tradition. They are available to human needs and human concerns, and they speak empathetically and inspirationally to those things. So it's kind of like you make offerings to them, and they come and visit you in your dreams, and sort of, you know, invite you to go in different directions and stuff. There are some chi characters that, because dakinis themselves are not like, you know, they're not goddesses, so they're flickering, you know. That's kind of the quality of the wood dragon also, is can disappear and reappear very quickly. So just like inspiration, like how many times have you gotten a good idea and been like, what was that again, you know, like it just doesn't
Last
stick
night.
around. Yeah, so that's actually there's a cosmological entity that represents that as a chi quality, and that's the dakini and the daka, you know, and the daka being the sort of male equivalent
Hmm.
to the dakini. So
Hmm.
they rule the year, you know, and but because they're
I
sort
like
of,
that. That sounds nice to me personally. I'm with it.
so also because they rule the year, and because their quality is not overwhelmingly strong, that means there are plenty of other entities that are not dakinis that can impersonate them and fool you, you know. And there's some chi characters that are more prone to be fooled this year
Snakes.
than others. Snakes, not as strong as like a tiger. A tiger is the danger for a tiger in this year is that, like, it's a wood element year, a yang wood element year. It's something they're very familiar with, but the scope and the perspective is different than how operates differently than what they're normally used to doing. So they'd be like,
They
okay,
could leap
yang
into
wood.
some shit.
And then they're just like, holy shit, what did I get myself into? You know, it's that kind of availability for tigers this particular year, because the content of the year is broader than what their specific goal is. And they don't necessarily see the broadness of it. And part of how they could be enticed into this kind of premature move is you know, a specter that's like, I can do Dakini, you know, you should totally do this, you know, a little angel on the shoulder and a little devil, you know, like these things, you know, they're analogous to a type of chi, you know, that's available this year. So particularly in the first couple moons, first 2, 3 moons, they should watch
Dude,
their step.
I'm gonna get onto some more personal shit, but you and me will laugh about this. I mean, we'll see if this makes it. And I don't give a fuck, whatever. But
Yeah.
I told you I was kind of seeing a fire tiger girl,
Oh yeah.
and this is a fire tiger moon, right now,
Yeah. Right.
and I know that she's very wary about getting involved with someone right now. But at the same
Hmm.
time, I can sense a will, like she's like, maybe I should just do it, maybe I should
She's
just,
sort of, she's, her tail is flicking.
yeah, she's
Flicking.
like, maybe I should leap into this relationship with this dude,
Well, tigers have had not, I mean, even though they had their
which
own
is
year, which is
interesting.
a couple of years ago, they're kind of pent up. So all tigers have a lot of pent up energy right now, because
Hmm.
even in their own year, they didn't really do that well, because there's this water sort of retreating kind of energy, or loss, you know, like to go forward and lose, to go forward and lose. So like tigers are looking for a
Yeah.
win right now. They want to win. They want a clear, definable win. They're very hungry for that. And they may or may not get it, but they're predisposed to jump for it, you know. So yeah, if you have tiger friends, you should just be nice to them and don't take advantage of their impulses.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
would be my
that's
advice.
we've discussed this. That's been my I've taken that stance where I'm like, hey, I think it's probably
Yeah,
better
yeah, it's all
transparency.
good. Yeah.
It's all good, girl, you know. Yeah, man. Oh, fascinating,
Mhm.
fascinating stuff. I um I have so many ideas rolling around in my head that I don't quite have a specific question for you right now. I think one way to wrap up would
Mm.
be you know, and you've spoken a lot about this, but maybe just to like summarize briefly. Um, this is I feel it. I think I'm not alone in feeling this. This is a
Yeah,
unique time.
yeah,
It feels very different than last year and the year before. It does, bro. I mean, maybe it's
yeah. It
also
should.
because you've
Yeah.
placed it in my head. Like if you didn't tell me that, would I still feel the same way? It doesn't matter at
Maybe
this point.
not. And I mean, maybe not. And the reason for that, I think, is because wood is not strong by itself. So again, this is the most lightweight of the five dragons. So it can flicker. So we're human beings are strong. We can carry morbidity for a long time, and there's people out there that are going to carry the morbidity of the last 4 years all the way to horse. And it's not going to go well because
So
uh
so that's
because they
that's
don't
kind of
get
the
they don't
summary.
do their refreshment.
That's kind of the summary that I'm looking for. Like on a very kind of pragmatic, practical kind of in a pragmatic, practical kind of way.
Right.
Um, Carrying morbidity of the last 4 years through the dragon, probably not cool. So what would be like again, I like to put you in the position of like the sage at court. I want to pigeonhole you into that position, okay, for a little bit. I think it's fun. But
Mm-hmm.
let's say you're a sage at court,
Mm-hmm.
okay, and your ruler is like, yo, you know, what the fuck should I do this year? Everything feels different. You know, the 4 years of, you know, floods and shit, pandemics and you know, interest rates. Now these motherfuckers are genocide on our border. It's all crazy.
Mm-hmm.
How can I best take advantage? Okay, and he's going to ask you that as a ruler, because
Mm-hmm.
that's his job
Mm-hmm.
of the lightness and the lightness, the optimism, the possibility for manifestation. What are the things people can cultivate, you know, that will or just be mindful of that will allow them to kind of really flow with the wood dragon chi this year? How do you, because real quick, whenever I feel like things are going well, it feels like I'm in the season, like I'm feeling the season, and I'm in, like, I'm not, it's not that I'm being swept away by the water, but I'm treading in a rhythm that works with the water, works with the river that I happen to be in. You feel what I'm trying to say? And
Yeah.
and Taoist thought is all about really being like walking the way and not disrupting it. Not
Okay.
so my point
Yeah.
is you feel what I'm trying to say? I don't want to talk too
Yeah,
much
yeah.
anymore.
I just want to respond before I forget what I was thinking.
Cool.
So yeah, the so if I'm in this kind of role and there's assumption that the calendar is in place, then as an operative, or at least one of the operative tactics of the government, then I have to concede to the opportunities of the calendar. I think what's interesting more than just about the year. So if freshness is what's on tap for the year, how do we cultivate freshness? And like that's the main question for everyone. And I think that because we're defaulting to this cosmological outlook, there are practices of humanity that exists within the Confucian system and in the Taoist system that reflect the calendar. So for instance, one of them is like playing music, right? So if we're just looking at pieces on a chessboard, and if I have a ruler that says, what do I do with this mess? Because we're assuming that a mess has washed up on shore, right? From the last 2 years. So how do we deal with this mess? For instance, if we're trying to encourage peace, invite people to walk through your garden. Um, right? So there's small, subtle, simple things that we can do throughout the year to kind of help steer and cultivate the chi in a particular direction. For instance, at this point in time in the first moon, approaching the first full moon of the year, there's not a lot of substance to work with, but there's just a feeling quality that's emerging. So how do we cultivate that feeling to then express a potential that then we can develop, right? So we're using the image of like seeds under the ground that are just not even quite sprouting. There's no green, like there's no green. It's just the feeling of freshness that we feel and that we're trying to cultivate. So at this point, for anybody, it's like I can't answer for you how to cultivate freshness. You have to figure that out. You have to figure out like how to cultivate freshness in your own life. Be interested in new people. Like Ming would say, go read a novel, see a new movie, something popular. Don't. It's not about like how I can like differentiate myself. That's not what we're doing right now. We're actually just trying to cultivate freshness together as an organism, as a body of linked inspired feeling. That's what we're trying to cultivate. We're trying to get that to emerge. So you can't do that all at once. It doesn't happen all at once. So we have to find in our own ways, human to human or within ourselves and our environment, ways to keep cultivating freshness. Even if you feel clueless right now, good. That's my response. Good. That's exactly what's available. So don't trip. If you feel clueless, I have no idea what I'm doing. I keep forgetting things. I'm like, yeah, like that's actually what spring is about, is the emptiness, the natural level of emptiness that comes with wood, that's like, what was I going to do today? Like that's a freshness, that's a beautiful freshness. And if we're trying to cram a bunch of stuff into that freshness, it won't work. And A, it won't work. And B, we'll miss the opportunity of like having something spontaneously occur to us. Have you ever tried to like manifest spontaneity? It doesn't work, so really it's about spaciousness, to allow the spaciousness to bring forward a spontaneous thought that I didn't act on it, but it was a good idea. I think I wrote it down. It doesn't matter, like another one will come. Like consider the world is like lined up with dakinis that want to offer you, um, a lantern, inspiration, something. But like how we make ourselves available to that, I think rolls back on this morbidity piece. Like just stop feeding the morbidity first, like you have to back away from the morbidity. I'm not saying that's easy. I also feel it, because it is such a heavy weight. It is such a heavy blanket. But that's actually what's available. That is the opportunity that's available. So if you need hope, if you need faith, use them. These are great tools. Like the Taoist and the cosmology that underlies the system is, it doesn't really deal on hope and faith or even trust all that much. But this is the type of year where you can use those things. You should use them. If you feel the need for like, you know what, I'm just going to trust. Go ahead, do it. If that's your appetite to like utilize those pieces. This is all very wood. Those are very wood-like emotions. That kind of hope and faith and trust. So that's the best I got. I think what's most important is that utilizing those things, if we become in touch with like an inspired body of feeling. This is what I keep coming back to this year. Where are we in our inspired body of feeling? Even if it's fuck those guys, like you with me on that? Yeah, fuck those guys. Like that's this is all very legitimate. It's not to encourage aggression. It's just to say that like recognizing that we're kind of on our own, which was the message from 12 years ago. What do we do? Like, and what we should be doing is like building this inspired body of feeling. Not that we need to take it to a goal, but like, what is it? What is it centered around? This common sense of feeling or what it means to be a human being. We have to rebuild, a lot of what we're going to base our future human societies around. We have to rebuild and rediscover, like, what do we want human societies to be founded in? What has been is not working. I mean, we've already felt and seen that. That's the basis of a lot of people's morbidity. It's all hopeless, you know. This is the time, but it's just the beginning, you know, like we can't get it all at once, you know. We have, but maybe we need like a hope, you know, maybe we need like faith to say, I know there's something that's real. You do too, like you feel it. This is Mencius's argument for what makes a good, that human beings are good. We all know in our hearts, in our chest, you know, what life is about. We do, you know, and like we should build on that. We should really feel that, to just stay with it, you know. That would be kind of the invitation for a Wood Dragon year. How do I express this? Where can it go? Who will listen? Nobody? Doesn't matter. Just to keep doing it. The Confucians are never deterred by lack of popularity. They don't care, you know, because they're just staying with their experience, because that's the practice, you know, that's what self-cultivation means, is to stay with one's experience and to know in your chest what feels like human. This feels human. Like this is human. This is human. But you know, again, we've grown up in a culture where being human is a sickness, is a disease. We're told that it's naturally created, and created badly, by, as a matter of fact, you know, and that we somehow have to overcome it, you know. That's not this system. And the system is like, no, it's good. You should keep it, and you should cultivate it. You should feed it, and then share it with other people. Because as it turns out, they have the exact same thing you do. Yeah, that's good. You should form your basis of society around this, you know, this thing that we all share.
Dope.
Mhm.
I'm gonna press
Yeah.
record right now to like turn it off. Okay.
Okay.
Wait. Actually, let's do an
Sure.
outro real quick while we're here. So I'm not gonna
Yeah.
play. Man, that was dope. You know, that was a wide-ranging kind of discussion. We talked about a lot of different things, and I appreciate it. I'm thinking about a lot right now. I'm thinking about inspiration. I'm thinking about decentralization
Yeah.
in an inspired, heartfelt way. So I like that,
There's so much potential. We have
and I
so
think
much potential all around us, you know?
I think what's also important is to understand that, and I hope we touched on some of this, but one of the things I wanted to talk about was the flow of time. So when you said that the inspiration and the manifestation that is available this year might
Mhm.
not see its full fruition until 4 or 5 years from now, I think that's a
Mhm.
very important thing to keep in mind, to have like a long-term view. So, yo,
Yeah.
you know what it is, man. We're gonna talk probably later tonight, maybe tomorrow, about this stuff. I'll get this set up, and then let's do it again, man. Maybe we'll do a full moon one. Maybe we'll do a shorter one about like specific things. Like, hey, let's talk about this particular chi character. So there's a lot of stuff we can
I
talk about.
appreciate that. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
cool.
man. You're the man. Thanks for coming through, brother.
Peace.
Love you.
Love you too.